Ladies and gentlemen, to our witnesses, to our jury, to our global audience, it is a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world. My name is Nozi Poshabalala, and it is such a privilege to serve you today as the chair of this very important conversation where the social contract is on trial. And of course, the big question that we're asking is, how can we fix the relationship between citizens and state? This is the question, the central question around which our jury, our witnesses, and of course you, our global audience, are all going to be engaging and grappling with. Now, in order for us to do that, I think it's really useful for all of us to have a common understanding and maybe even a common language about what it is that we mean when we're talking about the social contract. And so in many instances, we are talking about an implicit agreement between the state and citizens that really speaks to mutual rights and responsibilities in delivering a just eco-social order. In some instances, we see this reflected as a constitution or in legislation. And in other times, we see it as a softer expression. Where I come from in Africa, we talk about Ubuntu, I am because you are, and you are because I am. But in other parts of the world, if you go to South America, we talk about Buen Vir. If we go to India, we talk about Eco Swaraj. But all of these languages, although different, are all centered on the idea of a social contract. Of course, it also comes in all shapes and sizes, as I've already indicated. So if that is our common understanding, how does this allow us then to begin to put the social contract on trial and to ask the question whether these implicit agreements around mutual rights and responsibilities are indeed reflected as intended? Are we seeing a social contract that shows up as a positive tool towards democratic change? And so to help us work through those questions, our process for today is really, really simple. We're going to kick off with hearing from our witnesses. We have 3 witnesses standing by, and these are global experts whose expertise and insights we're going to be tapping into, and they are at the forefront of doing work around a just eco-social order. And so they're going to be bringing their unique perspectives into this conversation and helping us navigate what they are observing in terms of that relationship between the state and citizen. And then we've got our jury, and our jury is made up of really young people who come from youth networks from around the world, who are in many instances activists in their own right, and they're going to interrogate the witnesses. They're going to be able to cross-examine the witnesses by putting questions to the witnesses as well. But I do want you to hear me clearly as I extend this invitation to you, our global audience. You have a voice in this trial as well. And so we're keen to hear your thoughts as well. So our jury is going to share their verdict, but so will you. You will get an opportunity to vote. We're going to use a Mentimeter mechanism, and I'll talk you through it at the right moment, where you can tell us, having listened to the witnesses, having listened to the questions from the jury, where do you stand on the issue of a broken social contract? In addition to that, I do want to invite you to use the chat as the trial begins from start to finish. Send me your questions, send me your comments, and I'm going to try to the best of my ability to integrate your voice as we're going along and infuse your questions and comments in this very important conversation. Last but not least, I know that many of us are going to be lifting sound bites and amplifying this conversation around the world, and we're going to be using 2 hashtags to do that. The first hashtag is the social contract, that is the social contract. And our second hashtag is, of course, the People's Summit, which really speaks to the broader conversation that we are contributing into. So that's a lot of talking from me, and it is time for me to make way now for our witnesses. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to invite them to put their cameras on. We're going to start by hearing from Dr. Jillian Marcel, and I'm going to ask Dr. Marcel, there she is on your screen. She's got her camera on already. And as I introduce her, she has the floor. She's got the witness stand for about 4 minutes as we listen into her. She is, of course, a senior leader in economic development and international business. And she comes into this conversation with a proven track record in attracting investments towards emerging markets. And she's also a thought leader in the impact investment space. I'm going to leave it at that level of highlights because we could spend the rest of the day or afternoon or evening talking about her accomplishments. But for now, Jillian, let's turn the witness stand over to you and listen in as you share your thoughts, observations on the social contract.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning to the jury, and good morning to the audience. The social contract is broken. The social contract is guilty. The levels of inequality around the world are obscene. The poorest of the global community has the lowest share of wealth than at any time since the start of the 20th century. At the same time, the richest 1% have more financial wealth than 6.9 billion people. Let that sink in. Let me also give you some facts about the dysfunction in the structure of the economy. Financial assets are estimated at $150 trillion US dollars. This is some 3 times that of the real economy. So financial assets, according to the terminology, values that we are using, are worth more than actual goods and services. That makes no sense. And so in addition to speaking about the ways in which the eco-social contract is broken, we must also put the economic system on trial. In the 1970s, a group of people decided that maximizing profits was more important than any other objective. They have been successful because these ideas, usually called neoliberalism and associated with a particular scholar and economist, Milton Friedman, have taken root in a way that is difficult to unseat. But colleagues, we have the power. While there is an ideology that says that profit maximization is the most important thing that we should do, even in the United States, that dream has become a nightmare. And so around the world, the Green Economy Coalition, organizations like the Sustainable Business Council, and even more conventional organizations are trying to think through their way to solutions, but they are facing in the wrong direction. They are trying to convince elites who have the vested interests, the power, the influence to change. Whereas it is our power, it is people's power that must be at work to change the logic, to challenge the mindsets, and once and for all, say unequivocally that people and the planet matter. And so therefore we must have a contract, implicit and explicit, that benefits all. So that is my statement. I look forward to hearing from colleagues, and I look forward to providing some more evidence of what is already on the way around the world that can give us inspiration and hope that if there were some ideas that profit is more important than any other objective, that what we need to be doing is shifting that and once more putting community and planet at the center of what we do.
Dr. Jillian Marcel, she has been unequivocal in her stance and the evidence that she's given that the social contract is broken, highlighting the unprecedented levels of inequality, highlighting the dysfunction we're seeing in the structure of the economy, calling for the economic system to join the social contract in the dark and to also be put on trial, and reminding us that people still hold the power. And perhaps we need to rethink our approach as people, not to focus on the convincing of a few, but really about unlocking the power that resides. And that is what changes logic, mindsets, and hopefully behavior. Dr. Jillian Marcel, thank you very much. On your screen right now, ladies and gentlemen, as well as members of the jury, you are seeing Kumi Naidu. Now, Kumi is a lifelong social justice campaigner from South Africa. He was the International Executive Director of Greenpeace International. This was between 2009 all the way through to 2016, as well as taking on the leadership position of Secretary General of Amnesty International between 2018 and 2020. Kumi, it's an absolute pleasure to put you in the dock as you give your evidence now as a witness. And again, we give you the floor for 4 minutes, and I yield the floor over to you now.
Thank you very much, Nozi. Following Jillian's excellent presentation, I'm reminded of a moment during the liberation struggle where you started by saying most of the really good points I wanted to make have been eloquently made by the previous speaker. And then you said, however, for emphasis, and then you spoke for about 1 hour. I've got 3.5 minutes left, so let me be quick. It is clear to me, given the current state of the world, with the multiple intersecting crises that are upon us and the ones that are yet to come crashing down on us, and also considering that the methods, the strategies, the structures, and even the organizational frameworks that have been created to respond to this has merely been a patchwork solution for these failures, can no longer support the weight of our impending future. Even our current reality is untenable on almost every level. Cost of living and petrol prices are skyrocketing, leading to social unrest in many countries. The rise of fascism is continuing its determined crawl to prominence. Emissions are increasing. The war in Ukraine has left millions displaced and a country in ruins. And that has even caused bread prices in Africa to increase by 60%. In my own country, where I'm speaking to you from now, in my hometown, Durban, it was almost laid to waste by an extreme climate change related storm, which almost flooded half the province and left 600 people dead. It's true, most of you wouldn't have heard of it because such a loss of life didn't happen in Belgium, Germany, or the United States, but it's real, and the impacts of climate change are already taking lives in the global south, which has contributed least to the problem of carbon accumulation. It is obvious, therefore, that our current system, which we are told will save us with only minor adjustments here and there, which can be described as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as humanity sinks, will in fact not save us. It has slowly become clear that the bonds between citizens, government, and business are breaking down. Simply put, our social contract is broken, and we desperately need to create a new one. Now, it's important, though, to say this. Our social contracts were always broken for indigenous people, for women, for young people, for older people, for people with alternative sexual orientations, and so on. And when you add all those people up, actually the majority of people are excluded than included. This new eco-social contract can be hard to pin down, but in straightforward terms, what are we calling for is a fundamental shift in our shared understanding of how governments and businesses should treat the people and the planet, and what people and the planet can legitimately expect from their countries and businesses. This call for a new eco-social contract is not coming from some far-flung corner of our social landscape, but instead has been demanded by a diversity of groups and movements that we all know. We're talking here about everything from Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and the Director General of the International Trade Union Congress. I must confess, in my 40 years of activism, we have not been able to deliver the results that we promised. And therefore, Nozi, I must humbly say that I feel very uncomfortable with the title of expert, because I must ask myself this question in all honesty now. If I was such an expert, why are, if I might use an Afrikaans sentence, hoekom is ons so deep in kak? I hope that doesn't require translation. So something needs to change in the way we think about making lasting, meaningful, and inclusive change. For years, we as activists have been fighting for a seat at the table to shape decisions, but we should have been questioning the relationship that we had with other people, the power relationship with other people at the table. The question of a new eco-social contract is one that considers people, power, and planet in a mutually understanding relationship. To conclude, I'm just going to bullet point what we need moving forward. One, we need to turbocharge intersectionality. Two, we need to resist cognitive dissonance. That is the denial of reality, that we are really, really close to the climate cliff and the inequality cliff, and we are running out of time. Three, we need to resist the worst disease that humanity faces. Not COVID, but affluenza. Affluenza being neoliberalism, if you want, but the pathological illness where people believe a good, meaningful life comes from more and more material acquisitions. We need to embrace creative maladjustment in the way Martin Luther King spoke about it, resist the status quo, and understand that all our main systems that humanity needs to live from, our economic system, our transport system, our health system, and so on, as COVID showed, is highly broken. So what we need moving forward is not what we saw from our governments after the global financial crisis, which was system recovery, system maintenance, and system protection. What we need is system innovation, system redesign, and system transformation in the context of a new eco-social contract. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Kumi, thank you very much. And so many issues that you have put on the table. But what I just want to focus on is the actions. You've said we need to turbocharge intersection. We need to resist cognitive dissonance. We need to resist the worst disease that has hit us, that is the disease of affluenza. We need to keep pushing for justice. And of course, we need to resist the status quo. And maybe a quick translation for those who are not from South Africa. And in that sentence that Kumi shared there, and I thought very clever of him to leave it with me to translate, but how did we get into such deep bleep? I'm sure you can complete the sentence. But before I move on, and before I move on to our jury, maybe let me get Jillian back on the screen together with Kumi. Let's look at our witnesses together. Let's do a quick follow-up question to the both of you, and then let's open up to the jury to put their questions to you. Jillian, you know, one of the things that you spoke about, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we have when you speak about the wealthiest 1% and the control that they have over resources relative to the 6.9 billion people, the rest of the 6.9 billion people in the world. How do we take back power, especially when power has been framed as economic resource? When you talk about the power is in the hands of the people, do we see that? Do we recognize that? Or do we look at the inequality and say, well, we're powerless? And how do we begin to change that mindset?
That's actually the most important question of all, because if financial wealth is equated with value, then the world's majority feel and believe themselves to be less valuable. And so it becomes about our framing of what does it mean to be human? And from where does our human value derive? And so really, without becoming philosophical, but I think philosophy is actually at the root of this, we will change this when we reject the philosophy that says that wealthy people matter more than others. And we cannot then expect wealthy people to make that change. Now, some of them will come along, but it must be about a rekindling and a re-embrace of what it means to be human and to value that without giving away our power to those who hold financial wealth. And so it is about a mental shift. It is about a mental shift. And with that, we should also be reaching out to those among the wealthy and powerful who have some innate interest in solidarity with the rest of the world.
Sure. I think that's so well said. How do we decouple power from wealth? And how do we begin to address the question, from where does human value derive? Which I think is such a powerful question. Kumi, before I come to you, I just want to pick up a quick comment from Danny Mayers on YouTube saying 100%, Dr. Masal, our economic system's prioritization of profit-centric values above all else allows for manner of social and ecological pillaging to be considered acceptable. We've reshaped what is acceptable because we've decided that profits matter more than people and more than the planet. And so thank you very much from Danny for that question, but thank you for opening up that prompt. Kumi, let me quickly come to you, and then I want to go to our jury and give them the floor. I was floored at the statistic you shared with us. And that was talking about a 60% rise in the bread price, because I think that really speaks to what is really happening in the world when bread becomes difficult to buy because of where we find ourselves. I was also equally moved by you saying you are struggling with the title of being called an expert, but there are young people who are part of the jury today. If you could maybe pay it forward, what do you think might have been the biggest missed opportunity from the previous and current generations that you are desperately hoping that the young people who are part of the jury and those who are part of our global audience will have the courage to take up?
Thank you, Nozi. If I can just pick up from what Marcel said and say that one of the biggest problems we have is that we are often directed to areas of intervention where we are treating the symptoms of the problem, but we are not treating the root causes of the problem. So one of the things that we have to recognize right now, and I appeal to young people, recognize that my generation has failed, that in fact we are contaminated by bad experience. If I look at political leaders and economic leaders, they still say the same BS, I'm sorry to say, right? When they know it hasn't worked before and there's no chance of it working, right? What we need is for young people to use the freshness of the lenses, look at all intractable problems and imagine a society very different from what we have along the lines that Jillian mentioned, right? Now, you know, the sad reality today, Nozi, is that more people in the world can imagine the end to the world because of climate change. There are fewer people can imagine the end of that capitalist neoliberal system that we are talking about. Yeah. How is that possible? How is that possible that people say, oh, I can accept that the world is going to end, but I cannot see how capitalism is going to end. Capitalism as an economic system was created by humanity, and therefore it can be changed in ways. And bear in mind, even if you go look at what classic capitalism was about, this is not what we have right now. We have casino capitalism, right? Being at the right place at the right time. Come to South Africa, I can show you. People with almost no competence became multimillionaires because they used their pedigree in the struggle and abused it and so on. But the big question to think about how we address this, we have to also go to some big questions that we are often made to feel that is outside our ability to make a difference. I want to refer you to a book by Lorenzo Ferramonti called GDP, Gross Domestic Problem, the world's most powerful number. So you look at how we measure wealth. We measure wealth using a defective tool. So what does it mean it's a defective? If you chop down a tree, chop down a forest, you blow up a mountain, That's all positive tick on GDP. So we have to start saying that part of our job is to redefine how wealth is measured moving forward and not accept that we don't have a right to be in that conversation. Everybody has a right to be in that conversation. Thank you.
Kumi, so well said, and thank you for the resource as well for those who will be looking up that book by Lorenzo. But I think you've put it so well, because what we measure and how we measure it is a reflection of what we value. And oftentimes the things that we don't even bother to measure are the things we don't value because we don't think it's worth the time and the effort to measure it. So I'm going to ask you to keep your cameras on, because what I want to do is I want to expand this conversational space now, and I want to bring online our jury who are going to lead with a few questions, both to yourself, Jillian, and to yourself, Kumi. So to our global audience, it's my pleasure now to be seeing on your screen. Our jury is coming on, and we are joined by Yanis Kusman. And Yanis, and I'm just going to pull this up, is a law student at the University of Bonn in Germany. Yanis, let's get away from you so that everybody can see you who's not on Zoom, the ones on YouTube. Thank you very much. He started organizing protests with Fridays for Future in Constance in early 2019, convincing the city council to declare a local climate emergency by May 2019, and actually being the first German city to do so. And since July 2021, him together with 3 other youngsters have been suing the state of Northern Westphalia in a constitutional complaint for insufficient climate action. I can see, Jillian, your reaction as I'm watching your face, because this is what people's power really looks like. So thank you, Yanis, for being here. We're also seeing on screen Jack Johnson. Jack is a co-founder of thank you for the wave, Jack, of a climate youth-led think tank that educates young people on the systemic drivers of climate chaos and advances radical solutions necessary to arrest climate breakdown. Kumi, you like that because you were talking about how do we move from system maintenance to system innovation, system disruption, system transformation. Disha Ravi, let's get your camera on. Disha, I can see that you're here with us. And Disha is from Fridays for Future India. Nice to see you, Disha. She's an Indian youth climate change activist and the founder of Fridays for Future India. She was arrested and prosecuted in February 2021 for her work around calling for international attention to India's environmental issues, as well as the 2021 Indian farmers' protest. So these are the young people that have their sleeves rolled up, Kumi, ready to look at not just the symptoms, but to go to the root cause of many of these problems. So Yanis, Disha, Jack, as you can see, we've got 2 witnesses. I'm going to give you each an opportunity to pose 1 question, and then let's see if we can get to a second question. Yanis, let's kick it off with you. What's your question, and to whom would you like to pose it?
Yes, hello, and thank you very much to both of you as our witnesses, not expert witnesses, but witnesses. Thank you very much for providing your insights to us. As Nozi mentioned, I'm speaking from Germany right now, and I wondered, Kumi, where do you see the role of global north countries in turning away from materialism and affluenza, as you called it? What can global north countries do about that? Thank you.
Yanis, thank you very much. So I'm going to take all 3 questions because I think there might be an opportunity to take them as a group and then to take a stab at them. What can the global north do to diagnose and heal from the disease of affluenza is the question. Disha, let's go to you next. What is your question?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me, and it's such an honor to be on a panel with all of the people here, and I'm so glad I get to ask these questions. I think my question is, how do we actually work together with not just people we agree with, but people we disagree with to form a social contract, a new social contract that'll actually benefit the people and the planet?
Thank you so much, Disha. I think it's an excellent question. So how do we do a better job of working together, especially with people we don't agree with. And as Kumi was outlining the groups that have historically been marginalized, women, young people, indigenous communities, people from the LGBTQI plus community, oftentimes at loggerheads with those who stand at the center holding economic power. How do we open up and create that space? So it's an excellent question. Jack, let's bring your voice into the conversation. What's your first question?
Thank you so much, Nosy. And yeah, really great to be here and very exciting event. My first question is the nation state, which is the custodian of our current system, driving this world in polycrisis, fit to be the guarantor of the solution? And if not, who is the guarantor of this new eco-social contract?
That's an excellent question. I feel like I should have known you in my days when I was doing my studies in international relations, Jack. Absolutely brilliant question. Is the nation state fit to be the guarantor of this new eco-social order? It's a brilliant question. So back to you, Jillian. Let's give you first a stab. And there are 3 questions, so you're more than happy to touch on all 3. And then Kumi will come to you. And I want to reiterate this to our global audience. Your voice matters. Send me your questions and your comments, and I'll try and put them to Jillian and to Kumi as well. But Jillian, you have the floor for now.
Thank you so much. I think the 3 questions are excellent and they are all related. And so let me answer them in this way. Jack, I think that the nation state matters, but the nation state is not the guarantor. I think citizens acting in community and as a collective are the guarantor. And that may be difficult because there is also a role for the nation state. But the role for the nation state must be a different role, because since the end of the World War II period, the Bretton Woods era, we have seen nation states actually holding up the maximization of profit ideology. So nation states have worked not to promote the well-being of us as citizens and the planet, but have been co-opted into holding up that ideology that has failed. And so to go to Yanis's question, affluenza is just as much a part of that ideology. Because when that ideology, it holds you in your grip, what millions of people are doing are attempting to become part of those 5 white men who have more financial wealth than billions of people. It is impossible, but it is a mirage that grips. And so the work to be done is to enroll those within who have proximity to that elite to do the transformation while we get about our work of framing a new world order, framing a new set of dreams, a new set of aspirations, because we can do nothing as people unless we have hope. And so while I agree with Kumi about the failures of our strategies, I also think that this kind of intergenerational conversation is important because of the life experience and the wisdom that we have and that we need to be getting from people who are even older than we are, because there is a need to draw on what makes us human, to have the engine, to have the fire to resist, and then to do more than the resist. We need to engage the power of imagination.
Yeah.
No struggles in this world have ever been solved without the power of imagination. And so I am delighted to be part of this conversation because it fills me with energy. And I am just simply impressed by the level of the discourse that we've been having, even in the short time that we've been together. And in terms of how do you reach across the divides, it's tough. It takes courage. Many people want to reach across the divides to be proximate to those with power so that they can join that group.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about that. And so the courage is also to have the courage of your convictions, even as you are making change. So let me leave it there and look forward to hearing from the global audience.
Dr. Marcel, I think you've left us with some hard truths also in that response, and the courage of our own conviction. You've reminded me of a piece of poetry. A poet by the name of David White talks about how every time there are moments in life where you need to not only stop where you're going, but stop where you're becoming on your way there. And I think that is the challenge of conviction around that you're really putting on the table for us. Kumi, I want to put the same three questions. The Global North, what's their role in helping us to diagnose and heal out of this disease? Can we work with people that we disagree with as we formulate this new social contract? And is the nation state fit to be the guarantor of a new eco-social contract?
Thank you, Nozi. Nozi, next time, please ask me to go first before Jillian. Jillian takes all the nice points and I'm struggling. But just to endorse what Jillian said on the nation state, and if I might, I think we need to be all operating with much greater humility, right? I think as we sit here, what we know is the broad direction where we want to go. Reduce emissions, reduce inequality, strengthen the sense of community and so on. I think if we are brutally honest, none of us know exactly how we're going to get there. And that's part of the really important point that Jillian makes about the need for optimism in this moment, right? I would go so far as saying pessimism in this current moment is a luxury that we simply cannot afford, right? And I'll urge you to remember what Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said when he said, the pessimism, he said, I am happy to be a prisoner of hope, okay? And if you go back and look at some thinking from the 1940s, where it was said, the pessimism of our analysis can best be overcome by the optimism of our creativity, our actions, and our sense of community, right? And that's what we need to be striving for. With regard to Disha's question, hi Disha, I'm always happy to see that you are safe. And by the way, Nozi, you could have introduced you as what we hope will be the former Prime Minister of India, but let's not embarrass her too much. So how do we work with people we don't agree with? That, I think, is the most fundamental question of our, right? And here I want to introduce a notion called syntropic framing, right? Assuming 6 of us, and by the way, I'm so proud to see that we are gender balanced and we are quite balanced in terms of global North, global South. So it's not always that it happens. So very happy and grateful for that. So assuming 6 of us, we're wanting to launch a campaign tomorrow on addressing an unfair, unjust economic system and how do we make it better, okay? Now 6 of us could come together and come up with a slogan that says, let's smash the capitalist system. Now let's say we go with that slogan, right? The day before we launch that campaign, assuming we are here and there are a whole range of people on a continuum disagreeing with us. The day we launched the campaign, we pushed people even further, even people who don't have no interest in the capitalist system, but because they've been poisoned and been led to believe they are big stakeholders in the system because they have a job in some company, right, which is exploiting them, you push people away. But if we framed it as, let's build an economy that includes everybody and doesn't harm the environment, what do we lose? I'm not saying that everybody who disagrees with us will jump into bed tomorrow, but what you're consciously doing, Disha, is you are creating a possibility for dialogue, communication, and a possibility for us to win people over. We must refuse to accept today that activism is simply taking a position, announcing it to the world, and organizing all the people who already agree with you to start with, and maybe a few people who don't agree with you. But we then create an echo chamber. We only talk to each other. We convince ourselves of how just our cause is. That is not activism. Activism has to be addressing this crucial question Disha has posed. How do we win over the people that have been lied to through Modi and his fascist apparatus in India, to Trump and what's going on in the US, Bolsonaro and by the way, it's happening all over the world, right? Where lies are being fed down people's throat. And the one thing we must realize, right? People like us on this table, in this panel, we like to stick to facts. We believe in truth. We try to push the truth. But sometimes, if you just talk facts in the most boring way, and Steve Bannon and the fascists around him are going for the heart. They say, bugger the facts. Let's just get people's passions inflamed and so on. So part of it, Disha, I think, is be honest, be truthful, speak truth to power. We should not lie. But come on, we're never going to move people by constantly talking about 1.5 degrees and 350 parts per million and so on. We got to talk to people in a diversity of cultural impulses that resonate with people. We have to humble ourselves. And activism is not about projecting our consciousness on the people that we're trying to organize. And lastly, Nozi, I want to introduce a term which I believe should be what we all embrace. We need a culture of emergence. We need a spirit, as Jillian said in her comments, building deep sense of participation and involvement by community, and doing it in a way that can inspire massive participation, because to change things on the scale that we need to change it in a time scale that's so small, we are going to need the largest ever mobilization of people in the history of humanity if we're going to succeed. And I believe it's possible, because necessity is a mother of all invention. And when people see what's happening, lives are being lost on a scale and so on, I believe eventually people will stand up and be counted. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kumi. And I mean, there's so much that you've said, but I think one of the things that has really stood out for me is how do we frame the invitation? Because people are moved towards invitations. They're not moved because they are being attacked and put in a perpetrator frame. So how do we get people to want to be a part of the change? And how do we model our activism around that, amongst many things that you've said? So I can't believe that we have attempted to have this conversation in an hour. Time is just bleeding out. So what I want to do is I want to maybe pick up a couple of comments that have come from the chat. And then I want to say to our jury, let's go for a quick fire reaction or second round of questions that you might have. And let's see how much of that Kumi and Jillian can take on. So let me first start off with a comment that's come from YouTube. It comes from Tal Milroy, and I'm going to read it fully because I really think it gets to the core of why we're here. Tal says, there's so much that needs to be done, and I have the skills, but I always feel frustrated and I feel trapped, feeling like I don't know where I can direct my energy to help the situation. What I desperately want is a job that pays the rent and is making a serious difference to eco-social justice in the world. And on top of that, I just want to know what are the small things that I can do with my limited time and my limited money that will actually have an impact. So I'm going to pause there because I think Tal has captured the voice of young people around the world about wanting to be a part of the change, but also being true and real to what it is that we desire. Danny says, where do we start reimagining our economic system? And how can the social contract be used to drive that real reimagining? So as you were talking, Kumi, about system innovation, system transformation, I think one of the points that was made here today by Jillian was the power of imagination. So how do we begin to use that imagination? Alistair says, humility, hope, and paying attention to inequality, there's often a mainstream fear that being this nice can't result in any sustainable economy. How would you respond to that? So Kumi, being nice doesn't pay is what Alistair is observing. So again, maybe something for you to comment on. And then I'm going to maybe just do one last comment. How can we be effective and urgent while aligning deeply with compassion and with peace? Now, that's a lot that I've put from the audience. And what I do want Jillian and Kumi to think about is not to try to answer all of the issues, but maybe just to focus on one or two. Yanis, let's bring you in once again. Do you have another question that you want to fire off?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll keep it short. I'm wondering all the time, how can we include our fight against the climate crisis into the fight against social inequalities that we've talked about so far? And maybe you can also touch on this if possible.
Lovely. How do we include the fight on climate crisis as while we're looking at social inequality? Disha, future Prime Minister of India, do you have a follow-up question?
I think to me is, my question is and always has been is, how do we actually hold our leaders accountable? Because the only time they care about noise is when it's at international platforms where they have a tendency to lose face, and they'll be shamed on like an international stage. But the actual result of it doesn't last for more than days. And they convince everyone that they need another international conference to essentially take action, but that's not really the case. So how do we constantly keep holding them accountable in a manner that actually incites action? Because I do believe that is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we move from talk to action, but also meaningful talk that doesn't only happen on big stages? What's the conversation at a local municipality level, and how do locals hold their leaders accountable? Jack, let's give you an opportunity to add to this growing list.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my question is picking up on a point that Kumi had made earlier, and it's really about how can a new social contract be truly universal and sort of ensuring that it's not a social contract of the few imposed on the many?
Sure. How do we make sure that it's truly universal so that it's not about a few imposed on the many? So basically, it doesn't follow the blueprint that we currently have right now. So Kumi, this is your chance to go first. But I'm going to ask you to be very brief because I've snuck in a lot of comments from the audience. So let's pick up on one or two issues that you'd like to speak to. You're muted, Kumi.
Sarah, can I ask to share my screen briefly? I just want to show an image. If people can
I think the team can give you screen sharing, right? So let's go for it.
While they're doing that, Yanis, I apologize, none of us picked up on your question in the first round on the Global North and their role. I mean, I think what we need from the Global North is to do what they say at various climate negotiations. They're supposed to put up $100 billion per year in the Green Climate Fund. That's not an act of charity, that's an act of self-interest on the one hand, but it's also an act of paying the North's climate debt because they carry the historical emissions and so on, right? So I think to a large extent, it's—
Kumi, you can share your screen now if you want to. You are co-host now, yeah?
Thank you. So then in terms of how do we inspire the kind of mobilization that we need in the world, I think right now what we need to be doing is looking at multiple pathways by which people can participate. We must not, if it's a single mom with 3 kids in Johannesburg, right? His circumstances is going to be different from Yanis if he's a young student in Germany, for example, right? So we need to create an enabling environment where everybody can contribute on the basis of their skills, the inclinations, the interests, what gives them joy. Now, let me say this issue about joy is critically important. Our well-being is going to be challenged like never before in the coming years, right? We're going to have to make sure that we sing through it, we laugh through it, we dance through it, because that is what it's going to take for us to deal with the increase in extreme weather events, with the increase in repression, all of which is happening on a significant scale. Then one last response on climate crisis and social inequality. I think we must just note here that one of the mistakes the environmental movement made was putting climate in an environmental box. Climate is not solely an environmental issue. Climate is a cross-cutting issue. It's about our economy, our food system, and so on, and we need to change that dynamic. And then the last thing was social contract. How do you get it such that it's inclusive? And this is where I talk about this culture of emergence, right? What I'm saying is that we have to get into a situation where we are co-creating the solutions. Even those of us who might think we know everything, we must understand that there's the arrogance of knowing, that mentality of the arrogance of knowing intimidates people who might have ideas and not so confident to actually chuck in new ideas. We must be humble and recognize we need to do this together and create an environment where many people can contribute. Thank you.
Kumi, thank you. I think you packed in a lot in that minute, and I want to give a minute to Jillian as well. Thank you for the image on the screen as well, and it speaks to Jillian's earlier point. People have the power, so it's great to see the different pathways in which that power can be exercised. Jillian, a minute for you to react to some of the questions and comments.
Excellent, thank you so much. And let me also echo what Kumi has said and endorse his call for a culture of emergence. And I think in that culture of emergence, what we also need to deploy is a model of leadership that focuses on our liberation, our full emancipation as human beings, freed from the mental slavery of colonialism and imperialism that has bound us for 400 years, free to re-embrace, rediscover the civilizational knowledge of Africa, of Asia, of the indigenous people of the Americas, is what will provide the solutions to these crises. These questions may not even come up because there is no splintering between climate and inequality. It is capitalism and Western modernity that has caused that splintering.
Sure.
And so reclaiming what it means to be human as a steward of the planet is what we must do. Now that sounds very far removed from what individuals can do, but it is not. Because if we reclaimed what it meant to be human in service of people in community and the planet, care work would no longer not be counted.
Yeah.
And immediately, financial wealth and those notions would be turned on its head. So we have the tools. We have to remember and reclaim them to reimagine a positive future.
We have the tools. We've got to use them so that we can do the work of reimagining and reclaiming. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to give the jury an opportunity to share a verdict. It's going to be a very fire-fast verdict, but we've had a really robust conversation, and I'm keen to know where you've landed. Now, remember that for those of you following on YouTube, the grading that we're going to be using is also available to you on the platform. Grade A means that we urgently need to prioritize fixing the relationship between citizens and state. Grade B says it's important, but we should prioritize other challenges ahead of mending the social contract. Grade C says it needs fixing, but I'm not sure that that's going to help us to achieve our goals. Grade D says trying to rejig the social contract is a distraction from more important issues. And grade E says, no, the social contract's working just fine. It doesn't need any changing. So I'm going to keep to the same order, and I'm going to invite Yanis, Disha, and Jack to give a quick share what their grading is, and literally 30 seconds as to why. And then we're going to go to our global audience, give them an opportunity to vote and reflect on the outcome of that vote. So Yanis, let's go to you first. Is it A, B, C, D, or E for you?
Well, to me, it's clearly A. Kumi mentioned earlier that the social contract was broken, or is broken, but mostly it was always broken for some people. I believe that's very important to state. And going with what Jillian mentioned, that we need to put the people in the center of the contract. I have to admit that I'm still a slave of hope, as also Kumi mentioned earlier, and therefore I believe that we urgently need fixing, but it's still manageable to do. That's why A.
Thank you so much, Yanis. It's always been broken, but also the courage to really then make the necessary change of people, putting people at the center. So it's an A from Yanis. We urgently need to prioritize fixing the relationship between citizens and state. Disha, where do you grade us on this conversation?
I think I also agree with Yanis, and I will also be grading it an A, because what I took away from this conversation, that hope is a verb, and it's something that we'll have to actively practice every single day. And to fix a social contract isn't going to diminish the other issues that we are already facing, because it includes the other issues we're facing. I think Angela Davis said this, that we don't live single lives, and nor do we face single issue lives. And that's pretty much my takeaway from this conversation. So I also give it a grade A.
Thank you so much, Disha. We don't live a single lives, and we're not confronted by single issues. Thank you for that reminder. Jack, what is your verdict?
I think I would give it a B. Absolutely recognizing that fuller democracy and a renewed eco-social contract is absolutely needed to supplant this world in polycrisis with one that delivers human well-being and planetary flourishing. But I'm not convinced that fixing the citizen-state relationship is going to deal with environmental breakdown. I'm worried that it's too much of an anthropomorphic frame to and doesn't really comprise an agreement with all living things, in fact. And so I'm not convinced that it is the primary thing that will certainly help us overcome environmental breakdown.
No, thank you so much. Grade B coming from Jack, not convinced that is the primary, it should be the primary focus, but really thinking about, to Disha's point, those intersectoral issues that we need to be thinking about at the same time. So now very quickly to go to our global audience, exactly the same grade. We'd love for you to participate and let us know what you think in relation to the social contract, and then and how we should be framing, how we're thinking about it, but also the action. We're going to put a quick, a quick link in the chat. And I'm seeing that our technical team are saying all the votes in the chat are A's. So I was hoping that we were going to do a Mentimeter so we can see what our global audience is saying, and to see that, but we're seeing that people in the chat are participating actively, and they're saying it's an A, it's an A, it's an A, rather than putting up the Mentimeter. So if anybody else had a B or C, D, or even an E, I would be interested in that. But what we're hearing is urgency, and what we're hearing is urgent action now, but also in addition to that, Jack's voice, which is to say, we need to make sure that we're not thinking in silos, and we need to be thinking about all the other social, economic, as well as environmental levers and issues that we need to pull into focus. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the close of this trial. I want to say a big thank you to Jillian, a big thank you to Kumi, a big thank you to Yanis, to Disha, as well as to Jack, for bringing their voices and expertise. There were so many sound bites coming out of this conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing them on social media under the hashtag, the social contract, and of course, hashtag the People's Summit. My name is Nozipho Shabalala, and it has been an absolute privilege to serve you as your chair as we put the social contract on trial. From now, from me here in Johannesburg, it's good afternoon, and I hope that everybody has a pleasant day, afternoon, and evening from here. Until next time.